This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and if you're a regular viewer of our show, you'll know that we have a popular series called Gone But Not Forgotten, in which we honor the legacies of the greatest legendary stars in the history of show business. A few months ago, we featured a man by the name of Steve Garey, who was a protege and very dear friend of music superstar Liberace. He opened his heart and spoke candidly and frankly about the real human being behind the sequins, furs, and outrageous stage persona. The public response to that interview was overwhelming, and we were deluged with tens of thousands of requests to invite Mr. Garey back to our show to continue the conversation and hear more fascinating stories about Liberace. It's been made very clear to me that although Liberace has been gone since 1987, the public interest in his life and career has never dwindled. And there is no one alive today who knew him better than our guest. And so, by popular demand, I'm delighted to welcome back to our show, Mr. Steve Garey. Steve, thank you so much once again for being here.
Well, hi, Harvey. It's just great to see you, and what an honor for me to be invited back to your show. I really enjoy this so much.
Well, I loved having you. I have to start once again by asking you, do you think Liberace would approve of our outfits?
Well, I hope so. This vest he gave me in 1983, I honestly don't have too much occasion to wear it nowadays. But when you invited me on your show, I thought, well, there's a good opportunity, you know. I especially like that shirt you have under your jacket. Is that coral? Is that what you'd call that color?
Let's just say that on the screen, it looks coral. Off the screen, it looks more purple, but that's webcams for you. Now, Steve, I want to start by asking you, are you surprised by the public reaction to your interview on our show?
I'm not surprised at all that Liberace garners a lot of interest. He always has. His entire career, he did. He's an interesting man, and he was a very talented man. But what I think the public responds to back then when he was alive, what they're responding to now, is that Liberace was authentic. You know, he wasn't fake. What you saw was who he was. And bigotry and criticism be damned, he went forth. And he offered his talent and his music to the public all over the world. And they responded beautifully. They still do. So that doesn't surprise me one bit. Well, I'll tell you what does surprise me, Harvey. Your audience, and I'm not saying this to kiss up to you or your producers or anybody, but it's the truth. Your audience is just the nicest people. I know the internet and social media can be just a sea of meanness and hostility and anger. It can be. And so when I went on your show with reasonably controversial things to say, I put my neck out there. And the emails and the messages that I have received from your lovely, lovely viewers has been overwhelming. I've received over 2,000 messages. They're just the nicest people. I don't know where you get them, but you've got an exceptionally nice group of viewers. So that surprised me. Yes, that did.
Well, that doesn't surprise me because I've been saying from day one, we have the most supportive, the most enthusiastic, and the kindest viewership of any show that I've ever heard of or known.
Now you do, and I don't know how you did it, but they're lovely people, and there are hundreds of thousands, millions of them that are just delightful. I spend a lot of time, as maybe you know, on your YouTube channel for Harvey Brownstone Interviews, and I'm watching your other interviews, and I interact with your viewers and in the comment sections about other interviews you've done with these big stars, and they're all lovely people with nice things to say, and it's a nice place to hang out. If you're going to spend a couple hours on the internet, do it with Harvey. You know, they're nice people.
That's so sweet of you. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's the truth.
Steve, I want to tell you that of all the comments I received about your interview, the one question that kept coming up was about Liberace's boyfriend, Scott Thorson. You said that Liberace made Scott have plastic surgery on his face so that he could look more like Liberace. What do you think that tells us about the kind of person Liberace was? I mean, who does that to a partner?
Your statement was incorrect. What you said, unfortunately, I suppose is what a lot of people think. You said Liberace made Scott blah 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 do this and do that. That's not true, and I understand the public thinks that, but it's not so. Scott was a very willing participant in that. Scott wanted to do that. Liberace didn't force anybody to do anything. Scott was very enthusiastic about that and was a participant in it. Unfortunately, the movie, this ridiculous movie Behind the Candelabra, the actor Matt Damon, who played Scott Thorson, played that scene as if he didn't like the idea of having surgery, played it as if he was not approving of it. And that's not true. That's the opposite of what really happened. These are two people, Liberace and Scott Thorson, and what they did is really kind of their own business, you know. I thought it was odd. I remember it was a couple of years after they broke up, Liberace gave me a tour of certain specific antiques in his house that he was proud of, and came across this one framed portrait of himself, and he took it off the wall and showed it to me and said, "This is the portrait I showed the doctor to have Scott look like." And at the time, yes, I thought it was very odd, a very odd thing to do. But you know, I try not to be judgmental. Scott was a willing participant in this idea of having the surgery done, and he was, you know, giving ideas about the cleft chins of the doctor and this and that, as he recounted later to me. So, you know, it was mutual between them, and who am I to pass judgment? I know it's easy to do, but maybe I really don't need to pass judgment there. It's their business.
Well, I'm glad you cleared that up, that it was not Liberace who forced him. Now, Liberace was well known for being very devoted to his mother, but I've heard that she actually wasn't a very nice person. Is that true?
She was just a very cold. You know, I was only in her presence once, and I think that was 1980, probably, in Las Vegas. And she was brought to his home. She was in a wheelchair. She had a nurse with her. I think she died a year or 2 years later, something like that. So my own experience with her, my direct experience, is limited. I do know what Liberace said. I do know what his friends said, what Debbie Reynolds said, what Rip Taylor said, and on and on and on. She was just cold and stern. She would forever sit like this, and wouldn't laugh when other people were laughing. I don't know. I would never say that she was not a nice person. She wasn't mean or rude to anybody, but she certainly wasn't a very cheerful lady either.
What was Liberace's reaction when she passed away?
He said, "Finally, I'm free. Finally, I'm free." He backed those words up with actions. He seemed to be lighter in the months and years that followed. He seemed to be a little more outgoing, a little more talkative. He wasn't so guarded. He showed that he was a little bit freer. I don't know what he meant by that, but that's what he said. Thank God I'm free.
And what about Liberace's brother, George? The public perception was that Liberace supported him, but actually, George was financially independent and
Yeah.
successful in his own right. Isn't that true?
Yes, he was. He owned a music publishing company in Los Angeles, and he was a really nice guy. Similar personality to his brother Lee, outgoing and funny. He had a strong Polish American accent, whereas Liberace didn't. I don't know how that came about, but yeah, and he was married 5 times, and he was quite the ladies' man. He was very successful in the music publishing business.
Now, although you were a highly accomplished, very successful pianist and entertainer, and you were Liberace's protege, Steve, you never actually worked with Liberace in any of his shows. Is that
Correct.
because you preferred to be his friend rather than be on his payroll?
100%, 100%. From day one, going to his house, everybody around him was on his payroll. I mean, everybody was. People he considered his friends, people that he looked to for friendship and advice, and he would confide in them. They were on his payroll, and so they treated him accordingly. And I didn't want to be that person. I enjoyed my independence. I was doing well financially and getting some great credits, and then I got to be included in the Love Boat television series, and so I was doing real well. If I had taken the offer from him and his manager to do a summer tour with them, if I'd done that, it would have changed everything. I would have been just one more person on his payroll, and I didn't do it. I have mixed feelings about that now. I don't know if I did the right decision or not, but I just I didn't want to. I wanted my freedom to be able to talk openly with him about things and not have to think, oh my gosh, I'm talking to the boss. I better watch what I say. I didn't want that.
I think probably he appreciated the fact that you did have that independence. I mean, you did live on the property, you were a tenant, but you were not beholden to him for your income. And I'm sure that impacted the friendship.
I think so. Initially it didn't set well with him. I think he was used to having the upper hand over everybody. He was used to being the financial provider for everyone in his world. And I was clearly not going to be in that position. And I don't think he liked that. I think he kind of made that known. But as the years went on, he did appreciate it. And certainly the last year or two of his life, he got to see some tremendous success that I was having. And he seemed quite proud of me.
Now, Steve, it's well known that Liberace had absolutely no tolerance for substance abuse or addictions because he saw that as a sign of weakness. Is it true that Liberace, Frank Sinatra, and Jackie Gleason tried to convince Elvis Presley to quit drugs?
Yes, they did an intervention, as Lee told me. I don't remember what year. I don't know what year that happened, but they did try an intervention on Elvis, and it failed. Elvis got mad, and it went nowhere.
We've mentioned Frank Sinatra and Jackie Gleason. Who were some of Liberace's other good friends in show business?
Oh, goodness. He knew an awful lot of people. Out of those people he knew who were friends, real friends in the business, Rip Taylor, the comedian Rip Taylor, you remember him? They were very good friends for many years. Debbie Reynolds, of course. He was good friends with David Hasselhoff, from Knight Rider and from Baywatch, and David's mother. I'm sure there's others that are escaping my mind now. his best friend in life, who was his best friend from the late 1940s onward, was a woman named Tito Minor. Tito was the wife of the television producer Don Feddersen, and she was responsible for Liberace, for his success, and she brought Liberace to the attention of her husband. And in San Diego, Liberace was performing at the Del Coronado Hotel before he was famous, and Don Feddersen and his wife Tito went down to San Diego for the weekend. And then on their way home to Los Angeles, fog rolled in. The fog was so bad that they couldn't continue on the road, on the highway back up to Los Angeles. The only thing they could do was to turn around and go back to the Del Coronado and stay one more night and hope that the fog would lift by the next day. So they get back to the hotel, and what is there to do, you know? And Tito said, well, let's go in and hear the piano player. He's really terrific. And her husband, Don Feddersen, says, well, I don't want to listen to some piano player. She said, no, really, he's really good. You got to hear him. So she literally dragged her husband into this showroom to see this piano player. Well, Don Feddersen was captivated. Don just, you know, got all kinds of ideas saying, well, you know, I could put him on television. I could this and that and the other, and some ideas. And they did. They brought him up to Los Angeles and put him on for one or two episodes, and it was a hit, and the rest is history. He became a white hot superstar overnight. And again, all because of Tito Minor. So he never forgot that. He never forgot her. And he spent the rest of his life showering her with gifts and furs and vacations. And he was always very attentive with Tito. They went out to dinner often. She was his best friend. She was sitting next to me on the sofa the morning he died. We were there in the living room of the house as he died in the den. She was there to the end. So that's who I think of when I think of Liberace's close friends.
Steve, how did you learn that Liberace had AIDS?
He told me in his car. We went shopping to the Palm Springs Mall. I had heard on the news and kind of what everybody else had heard. There was rumors, and he had lost quite a bit of weight. It wasn't much of a secret. I was home on a break from Japan. I was working in Japan doing a television series, and I had records that were successful over there. I flew home maybe twice a year for a rest. He calls me in the cottage and says, let's go to lunch. And I said, okay, so drive your car around to the front. I did, and he wanted to drive his Lincoln, so he drove, sat in the passenger seat, and we went to the Palm Springs Mall with the intention of going to his favorite shop there, and have lunch at a deli there that he liked, and we did. But when we got there, he stopped the car, and he didn't want to get out. He wanted to talk about the situation. And you know, I was very young. What was I? Gosh, 23 or 24, and so all I did really was listen. I didn't have any wise words for him. I didn't really know what to say. I just listened, and it was a different Liberace. I had not seen that side of him ever before. He had a different personality, had a different demeanor. Of course, he looked different. He was painfully thin. We get out of the car and we walk to the entrance of this Palm Springs Mall, and he's wearing a floor-length black fur coat, went down to his ankles so that it would cover how thin he had gotten. And as we walked in the door of this mall, people started recognizing him. There was a young girl, maybe 13 or 14 years old, that came up to us and extended her hand and asked for an autograph, and you know, said how nice it was to see him. She was very nice. Well, he was in such a bad mood and he was just on edge that for the first time in his entire career, he snapped at a fan, and it wasn't nice. He told her she was rude and that he's just trying to shop with his friend, meaning me, and to leave him alone, and you should know better. And well, this girl, this young child, was quite upset with that, and Lee just took off and started walking away, dragging me with him. And I finally I said, "You go into the shop. I'll catch up with you." And I went back to that girl, and I explained to her, I'm sorry, he hasn't been feeling well. He's been sick, and so he's just in a bad mood. He didn't mean to be rude. I was trying to, fix the situation, and I think I did good by talking with her. She's definitely seemed to understand.
That was a nice thing that you did. I read that Liberace always believed right to the end that he was going to be cured. Is that true?
Well, not to the end, but for some years, yes, he did. Because he had beaten a death sentence earlier, back in 1960. He inhaled some toxic fumes, and it damaged his internal organs, like a kidney or liver or something like that. And they didn't think he would pull through. Well, with positive thinking and this and that, he did pull through, and he beat the odds, and he thought he could do that again, and said so. And he was told that this HIV/AIDS was a virus, and he thought he'd treat it like a virus, and he really did go on a watermelon diet. He really did. He ate nothing but watermelon and a little bit of boiled chicken now and then. Well, sure, that only helped to have him lose all the more weight that he didn't need to lose. So he began to look even more sickly just from the watermelon diet. But he thought he was going to beat it. I don't know what changed, but by the last 6 months of his life, he seemed to know that it was going to be the end. He had all of 1987 and most of 1988 booked and contracts signed, but in 1986 he canceled all of that without explanation, and he just told people he was going to take a much needed vacation, a long vacation, a year or more. So he knew that this was the end. Certainly in January of 1987, when he went into he went into Eisenhower Medical Center in Rancho Mirage, in the ER that night, they told him there was nothing more they could do for him, sent him home to die. So he certainly knew.
Steve, when you were last on our show, you talked about Liberace's very last interview on Oprah's show. So I went back and watched all of his final interviews, and I was watching his last appearance on the Johnny Carson show. And it may be my imagination, but I remember thinking that Johnny Carson looked terribly sad during that interview. Do you think that Johnny may have been aware that Liberace was terminally ill?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. And didn't Carson say something about to that effect after Liberace died in an interview? I think he did. Johnny Carson was well connected in Las Vegas. He owned a TV station or two in Las Vegas. There's the publisher of the Las Vegas Review-Journal got wind of Liberace having AIDS. Liberace was tested and was given the diagnosis at a doctor's office in Sunrise Hospital in Las Vegas. So, and he got the bad news there. So I'm thinking either that doctor that did that test or his nursing staff or someone there called the Las Vegas Review-Journal. How else would they know? It had to come from that office. So that newspaper started running commentary saying there's a celebrity that works this town, headliner that needs to come out and admit, that he's gay, admit that he's got AIDS, and they were just hounding Liberace to come out and for why? I mean, it's his own personal business. He doesn't owe anybody anything. But it went on. That person told Carson, for all the things you can say about Johnny Carson, he was a decent guy at times. And he put Liberace on the show a couple of times after finding out he had a terminal illness. And he would let Liberace play for classical music for 7 minutes, 8 minutes, whatever it was, and just have full reign for whatever he wanted to do for as long as he wanted to do it. Liberace was on that show twice at the end. I believe his last appearance on the Tonight Show, his very last one, was when Johnny Carson had the night off and the guest host was Bill Cosby. I believe that was the last. And that's worth seeing as well, because you're seeing a very thin, gaunt Liberace who really didn't fit into his costumes very well anymore. He'd lost so much weight, but he played so beautifully. That's a great show to see. I bet they have that on YouTube as well.
Now, last time you were on the show, Steve, you talked about the day that Liberace died, but I didn't ask you, so I'm going to ask you now. How did you come to terms with his death emotionally?
Well, it was like for anyone that loses a best friend or a parent or a sibling or somebody close to you, it's a terrible loss. It's terribly sad, and I guess I was initially in shock, and as anybody would be, and sad and sullen and depressed. It was terrible. He was my piano teacher, and he was my next door neighbor, and he was my friend, and he certainly changed the trajectory of my life. It changed my career and made me be more cognizant of correct ways to perform an arrangement. He gave me so much knowledge that I didn't have before. So to see that person sick and then dead was horrifying. It was just absolutely horrifying. As anyone does, you go through the motions, you go on with your life, you go to work, you do this, you go to the market, you put gas in the car, but you feel like crap, and I remember I was invited to a function at his museum in Las Vegas. They wanted me there, and I went, and it was so painful for me to walk in that door. It was so difficult. The weight I felt on my shoulders, and it was just horrifying, because there was all of his memorabilia, his pianos. There was some of his furniture from his home that I saw every day for years, and now it's behind glass at a museum, and it was horrifying, and it just reinforced the reality that he was dead and how final death is. For somebody in their early 20s, that's a lot. That's a lot to grapple with. It was a lot for me to deal with. It took a long time. I don't think I'm really over it even still. As recently as 2005, 2006, I had a recording studio that I owned in an apartment in Las Vegas. My musical director, my conductor, flew in. We were going to record a CD. And I took him around town, and we went to the Las Vegas Hilton, where Liberace had played for all those years. And we're walking around, and this is 2005, right? Nearly 20 years after Lee died. And there were pictures of Lee still on the wall, and there was candelabras that they put in tribute to Liberace, and a plaque to Liberace. And this is like 20 years after he's been gone. And I'm there on business with an employee of mine, my musical director. And it was very emotional for me to see all this. It just brought everything back as if it had happened yesterday. You'd think you'd get over it, get over the sadness, get over the loss after that many years. But I remember being on a staircase at the Hilton in 2005. My conductor was walking in front of me. I couldn't take another step forward. I had to stop and compose myself. The tears welled up in my eyes just looking at the pictures of Lee and the tributes to him, because the Hilton valued him so much because of all the things that he did for them in having his show there. So, it was still raw 20 years later.
Steve, you and I have spoken privately about the fact that Liberace sometimes didn't have good judgment about people. He sometimes trusted the wrong people. And you've spoken publicly that immediately after Liberace died on February the 4th, 1987, he was horribly betrayed by his boyfriend, Jamie, his housekeeper, Dorothy, and his two best friends and neighbors, Ken and Vince, who witnessed his last will. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. That wasn't the first time. 5 years earlier, they had shown to me, in front of me, that they were dishonorable by stealing money and jewelry from him 5 years earlier. So when he died, it wasn't that surprising. Did you want me to talk about the first occasion when I first learned that they were dishonorable crooks stealing from him, or do you just want to know about when Lee died?
Well, tell us about the times that they stole from him, and also what did you do about it?
I had just moved onto the property about a year earlier, 1981. I think I moved on property, and the reason I moved on the property was we all got along so well. We were all such good friends, and we all liked each other. His friends, his employees, and me, and it was just such a great atmosphere. I was a young person at 22 or 23 years old, and to find kind of a gay family, if you will, a gay family dynamic, a friendship and acceptance, and we all knew about music, and we all knew about show business, and Liberace knew everything. It was a great, great thing for me, a young person finding his way in the world. So that's why I moved out of my apartment into a cottage there on the property. I believed these people. I believed them when they were nice to Liberace. I believed them when they acted like they cared. I believed them. Who wouldn't? He had a housekeeper in California. Her name was Dorothy. A young woman, maybe late 30s, blonde, married with, I think, 4 kids. She lived in Riverside, California, which is about 45 minutes away from Palm Springs. His new boyfriend, Kerry James Wyatt, who Lee called Jamie, so we all called him Jamie. The two next door neighbors was Ken and Vince. They were an older gay couple, had been married 36 years. They were funny. They were great cooks. They were smart. I thought they were legitimate. Until one day, I'm swimming in my pool. My cottage had its own pool. And in between the main house and my cottage, there was a wall. fence or wall with a door in it. Also, on my side of the property, next to my pool, was a 4-car garage. That's where Lee kept all of his cars and his limousine and most all of his cars there. Well, the gate opened in the middle of the day while I'm in the pool, and I looked over, and his new boyfriend, they've been together maybe 6 months, I guess. His boyfriend comes through the gate and walking along the pool deck in front of me, carrying a leather satchel over the shoulder, large, oversized briefcase satchel kind of thing. I recognize that satchel as being Liberace's cash bag. You know, Liberace would go on tour every month for 2 or 3 weeks, right? And after the shows, he would have one of his employees go out in the lobby and they would sell merchandise, right? They would sell records, in those days, cassette tapes, coffee mugs, Liberace calendars, Liberace tea towels, Liberace soap, Liberace, you know. So Lee traveled with a large trunk kind of thing that had all the merchandise in it. And they would carry that from city to city. He would also carry this brown leather satchel with cash in it. It would be all the cash that they would bring in from merchandise sales at each city that Liberace performed in. So then when he would get home, there would be a lot of money in that satchel, right? So there's Jamie walking across the pool deck. And I said, well, Jamie, hi, how are you? He looked very, very nervous. And he didn't respond to me. I thought that was very strange. Just then, a sliding glass door at Ken and Vince's house, which is next door to mine, opens up. Ken Fossler is opening that and kind of guarding that gate and motions to Jamie to come through. Could look through that open sliding glass door and see another door on the other side of that room was open. And there in front of their house was the maid, Dorothy, in her red Ford Escort parked. And she's in the driver's seat and she's got her hand over where she opens the passenger side door and pushes it open, swings it open. So Jamie, clutching this satchel of cash, walks through that house, out the other door, jumps into that car as fast as can be. She hits the gas and it peels off. You could hear the tires screech, and he's trying to close the passenger side door as they take off. Well, I didn't know what I just witnessed. It looked strange, and Lee's trusted friend and next door neighbor, Ken Fossler, said, you know, you didn't see anything. You didn't. I said, well, what did I see? You know, why is he coming through here? And why is he going into my house? And well, I don't understand. A couple hours later, my phone rings, and it's the house manager who, you know, works at the main house with Lee. George Liniers, a wonderful guy. He'd been with Lee for many, many years. George Liniers said, have you seen Lee yet today? And I said, no. And he says, okay, well, avoid him. Avoid him. He's not in a good mood. Just, you know, trust me, you don't want to be around him. Find something else to do. And I said, well, that's kind of hard to do. This is his property, you know, and he's all over the place here. How do I avoid him? And he said, I said, what's the problem? And he says, well, he and Jamie flew in from LAX last night, and they went straight to the penthouse in Hollywood and changed luggage there, and then decided not to stay at the penthouse. They drove straight here and got here to Palm Springs in the middle of the night. And when Liberace woke up, he went straight out to the car to get luggage out of the trunk and noticed that the satchel of cash, his cash bag from merchandise sales of several cities of a month-long tour, was missing. And he knew how much money was in it. He knew it was $17,000, and there was some personal jewelry in there as well. And it's missing. He put it in there when he got back from the airport at the penthouse, and he was loading up the Lincoln. He knew he put it in there, and now it's gone. And he wants to know, where is it? He's mad. And my mind went to what I had seen happen 2 hours earlier on my own pool deck. And I was trying to put two and two together. And I said, okay, I'll avoid him. Well, I went straight to Ken Fossler, who is the one that bought, he and his husband, Vince Franza, they bought Liberace's mother's house. And Liberace leased back the garage, leased back to guest cottages when I was in, and so on. So that's how they shared this property, so to speak. I went to Ken, and he says, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear about it. And I said, I've got things to do, and physically pushed me out of his kitchen door. And I thought, this is not good. This is theft. And I'd never seen this. Harvey, I was a young guy. I'd never seen this before. Now I'm 66 years old. I've seen criminal activity, but I was a young guy. I had never seen this before. And how is it possible that someone's own boyfriend would be there to steal from someone, steal from you? How is that possible? A trusted employee. How is that possible? That they'd all be nice to Liberace's face for 1 minute, and then literally stealing from him the next. It was so, what's the word? I was disillusioned. The people I believed in, the people that I thought were so cool and so funny, and the reason I moved there, those people were frauds. They were
Did
frauds.
you tell Liberace?
Well, there's the question. I had to decide, didn't I? And I had to weigh it. And I came to this conclusion. Liberace desperately wanted to believe in people. He desperately wanted to believe the world was a good place. That's partly why he tried to control everything and everyone around him. He wanted everything good, didn't want anything bad. He didn't want to see bad. If I had said something to him about that, and believe me, there was many times I had my hand on the buzzer on the intercom from my cottage to the main house. As many times I reached for the phone, and I had the phone ready to tell him. But who's he going to believe? Is he going to believe his own boyfriend that he lives with, that he sleeps with, that he trusts everything with? Is he going to believe his trusted employee? Or is he going to believe this wild accusation from his tenant, his piano student that's living in the cottage on the other side of the garage, who he's known, for 2 years, who's, some young kid, not a grown adult to be trusted? Who's he going to believe? He's not going to believe me, Harvey. I took that chance. I made that decision that he was not going to believe me, that there was no good to be done by me telling him that they were stealing from him. And I saw the satchel go out the backside of the property and into Dorothy's car and zoom down the street. He would never have believed me. That was my decision at the time. So I never said anything. As it turns out, I was right. I was right. Because maybe 2 years later, someone did. The house manager, George Liniers, did tell Liberace, and he told Lee, Steve saw everything. Steve was swimming in his pool. Steve saw everything. And here's what Steve saw. This is where your money went. George Liniers had been working for Liberace more than 15 years. He'd been working for him in Las Vegas, in Los Angeles, and then transferred to house manager in Palm Springs. A long time trusted employee, valued employee. He was a gourmet French chef. He did great things for all of Liberace's parties. He was just the perfect house manager. All those years of trusted employment, and he told Liberace everything. He said, "Go talk to Steve. Steve saw it all." Do you know what Liberace did?
What did he do?
That trusted employee, he fired him on the spot. He said, "How dare you?" He said, "Jamie's my boyfriend. That's baloney." He said, "I don't know what you and Steve got cooked up, but that's just baloney. You're fired. I don't want to ever see you again. You know, Lucille Cunningham will mail you a check. You get out of my house. I prefer you get out now, but at the latest tomorrow, get out. I will call you a cab. I'll pay for a hotel, but you're going to get out of my house." And Dorothy is a sweet woman. She's married with all these kids, and she wouldn't do any blah, blah, blah. And you're fired. And George was stunned. And he said, "I'm just trying to help you. I have nothing to gain here. Do you understand, Lee? I've got nothing," called him Mr. Liberace. "I've got nothing to gain by telling you this, other than I care for you. I've worked for you for nearly 20 years. I want you to know this." He fired him and did not look back. George Liniers calls me. I was stunned. Part of me was stunned, and the other part of me was thinking, boy, you know, thank goodness I didn't tell Lee when I almost did, you know, or I'd be out on my ear too. Lee didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to hear it.
So, Steve, can you tell us now about the thefts that happened immediately following Liberace's death?
Yeah. It was on the morning of February 4th, 1987. I got to the main house, about 9 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning, something like that. And Tito was already there. It was quieter that morning. Lee's sister was there. Dorothy, the maid, the boyfriend. They had now been caught having a romantic sexual affair over some years, those two. And that was, everybody knew except Liberace. And believe me, we didn't tell Liberace. It was ridiculous what they were doing. You know, when he was out of the house, it was just horrifying. So she was there, the boyfriend was there, the nurse was there, and I think that's it. I didn't go in to see Liberace in the den. I stayed in the living room. Just some minutes after 10 o'clock in the morning, the nurse came out of the den and said, "I'm sorry, he's gone." And that was horrible news. Even when you know it's going to happen, when it's imminent, it's still a horrible thing to hear. It still rattles your psyche, you know, hearing that final news. And she said that she was going to dress him and clean him up a bit. If anybody wanted to go in and see him, they could, and pay their last respects. And she turned and walked back into the den. As she turned and walked back into the den, the boyfriend and Ken and Vince, the neighbors, got together and made a beeline down the hall, which was a long, grand hallway past two guest bedrooms. And at the end of the hallway, well, the hallway's maybe 50 feet, 60 feet long. At the end of the hallway was Liberace's master suite. And dressing room area. And I thought it was odd because they didn't seem upset. You know, next to me was sitting Tito Minor, and she's weeping. She's crying and weeping. And these three didn't seem upset at all. It seemed rather businesslike, and they were in a hurry. And I thought, well, why are they going down there right now? So I got up and I followed them. And I went into Liberace's bedroom, and I could hear some rustling going on another 40 feet away in Liberace's dressing room. So I walked into there. And what did I see? But they've got the drawers open to his jewelry case, and they're trying on rings, and they're trying on watches, and this and that, and not really saying anything. They're doing this in silence. And I said something, asked, you know, why? What's this about? And they started yelling at me, and you know, get your fucking ass out of here, and profanity, and you know, and threats, and I don't know what I said, but we had an argument. And well, they didn't stop. They still were putting things and pocketing things and putting things on, and I let it be known that I, you know, disapproved of this, but they were threatening my life, and Ken Fossler was threatening my life. And I just walked out of the room. There was nothing I could do. What am I supposed to do? Beat them up? What am I supposed to do? I don't have, you know, handcuffs. What do I do? Call the police from there with them standing there? You know, it'd be my word against theirs, wouldn't it? The police wouldn't believe me. It'd be my word against theirs. And so I went back to my cottage and went on with the day, which is a very emotional day and very difficult day. I had to call some people really for comfort because I was very sad at losing my friend, and some people did give me great comfort and said that, you know, that I should be proud, you know, that I was the one honest person in Liberace's life. And I said, boy, if you only knew, they said, well, you could be proud of what you brought to his life, and try to remember that, Steve. And then I called one relative who sadly enough was very bigoted and cruel, and called him a faggot, and I had to defend Liberace, and so it was good and it was bad, but I had to reach out to somebody, Harvey. I couldn't just sit there. I had fallen to the floor of my cottage. I remember that gold color shag carpeting that Liberace put in there, and it was up against my face, and I just crying, and I thought I'd get solace by reaching out to friends and making calls, and I did. I went on with my life, but seeing them steal from Liberace less than 1 minute after he was pronounced dead by the nurse was just horrifying. It's still upsetting to me today, Harvey. I still can't deal with it. I can't explain it. How is that possible, Harvey? How is it possible for anybody to do that? You couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. Your viewers couldn't do that. But it happened. People did that. How can you plot how you're going to steal from someone while they're alive, and then look at your watch and count the minutes until they did? Okay, they're dead. Boom. You know, let's go raid the jewelry. What kind of an animal does that? I still can't figure it out in my head. How is that possible? That any human being could do those things?
And didn't they throw some parties in his house for a few days after he died?
They sure did. Lee died, I think, well, he died on the 4th. It was earlier in the week. after the funerals, there were 3 funerals, one in Las Vegas, one in Palm Springs, and one at Forest Lawn gravesite in Los Angeles. After those, mind you, these neighbors and that housekeeper maid, they'd been watching Liberace and his money and his wealth and his privilege for years. And they wanted it for themselves. And the jealousy was burning inside of them, and they would plot. And the more they'd see, the more it would burn inside them. So that now, when they're free to do whatever they want, they went hog wild. Ken Foster lifted his husband, Vince, who was a shorter guy, up, put him up on his shoulders so that he could jump over the wall that separated their house from Liberace's main house. Once on the other side, he could then go to one of the gates that he could open, let him in. They called their family and relatives back in Pennsylvania and on the East Coast to all come out and have a party for a weekend. And they did, and they're eating Liberace steaks and going through the freezer and defrosting everything and drinking all of Liberace's alcohol in the bar and going through the place like crazy. And they, put their relatives up in Liberace's guest rooms and, making a mess of the place. And then when one group of relatives left, another group of relatives flew in. It was horrifying, and they're having a grand time treating it like it's an Airbnb or something, that they broke into. It was horrible to watch because they were not grieving. They were not grieving at all. They finally got what they sought for all those years, and that is they wanted to be Liberace. They saw what a great life he had. They wanted it for themselves, and now they are Liberace. They're in Liberace's home. They're wearing Liberace's clothes. They're wearing Liberace's jewelry. They are Liberace now. And they walked around like peacocks, like proud of themselves and the host of the party for days around that house. It was unthinkable. I did not know Liberace's attorney personally at all then. I do now, but I didn't then. But I called that guy's office and I left a message with somebody and I said, there's a party going on this property here. And it was when one other individual, a contractor, witnessed what was going on. He also called. I gave him the number. He called the attorney. And then that's when the attorney sent some people over and they cleared out the house. They took pictures of the place, every room. They changed the locks. They put on a stronger security system. The boyfriend, Jamie, Harry James Wyatt, what to do with him? They had to secure the house. They had to get everybody out of the house. They could steal things. What do you do with him? So Jamie was offered the servants' quarters. He could stay in the servants' quarters, but everything else was off limits. Everything else was locked down, and he had no access to it. And that's the way it stayed until the property was sold. And Jamie was then moved out and went on his own.
Now, Steve, as you know, there was a lawsuit launched against Liberace's estate by his manager, Seymour Heller, and you gave a deposition in that lawsuit. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was something. It's all public record, that trial was April, May, and June of 1987. What happened was when Lee died and the will was read, Liberace had named his longtime personal attorney as the executor of his will, and he named that his longtime personal attorney as the new chairman of the Liberace Foundation for the Performing and Creative Arts, which is a charitable organization that Liberace himself founded in 1976. And they operated the Liberace Museum and other things. And nowhere in the will was mentioned Seymour Heller, Liberace's longtime manager. Seymour thought that he was going to be remembered very well and get millions in the will. Seymour thought he'd be named executor. Seymour thought he'd be running the foundation and running the museum. He had all these grand ideas, and he had a big shock when the will was read, and he wasn't. It wasn't. So he was mad. So he filed a lawsuit saying that when Liberace signed that will, naming the attorney to all those positions, the Liberace was not of sound mind and body. That was his contention. The Liberace was not capable of making that decision. And so he wanted the will to be made invalid.
As I understand it, the reason Liberace cut Seymour Heller out of his will was that he found out that Seymour Heller had been embezzling money from Liberace. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct. And, you know, we all thought that Lee would fire Seymour, and he did not. And I was very frustrated with that. I was not happy that he kept this crook on as his manager. Why he did that, I don't know. But Liberace was very quiet about that. And looking back now, it's been 40 years, I can see that Liberace was very methodical. When he figured out that people really were harming him, he got even with them in other ways. He didn't want a scene. He didn't want to throw anybody out on the street. He did that once before with Scott Thorson, and look where that got him. That got him a lot of bad publicity. So he didn't want to run the risk of throwing anybody out or firing anyone for fear they'd go write a book or a tell-all, or it would hurt him in the long run. So he kept them around, but he never forgot. He never forgot. Seymour needed backup. His own claim he didn't think would be enough. He needed witnesses. And so he went to the people that were around Lee at the end, and that would be the housekeeper maid Dorothy, the boyfriend Jamie, another housekeeper, and these crooked next door neighbors, Ken and Vince, right? And went to them and made them this deal. If you testify, I'm going to sue. And if you testify on my behalf, and if you can say that you saw Liberace was feeble, he was out of it, he was weak, he was sick, and that he was not capable of signing a legitimate will and testament, I'll share equal shares of the money that comes into me as executor. In California, an executor is allowed to get a certain percentage of the estate for their services. And in Liberace's case, that executor would get about $1 million, something like that. And there was more monies if Seymour were to be named chairman of the Liberace Foundation and ran the museum and all that cash flow that goes through that museum every day. So there was a lot of money on the table, and he offered to share it equally with these people. They took the deal. And so it goes to trial, and I get a phone call at my home I had just bought my first house in Lake Arrowhead, California. I get a call asking if I would give testimony and give a deposition. I said yes, and I flew to Las Vegas in late April and did just that. And what I said to the attorneys and what I said in my deposition after I explained, these people are crooks. Liberace knew they were crooks, when he was alive. That's why they were not mentioned in the will. They've been crooks forever. The maid is having a sexual affair with the boyfriend. The boyfriend's having a sexual affair with the maid behind Liberace's back. And the Seymour is stealing money from the merchandising. And if you don't believe me, I can give you a list, a small list, but a list of other witnesses to corroborate just what I'm saying. And they did. And they called those people in for depositions. And some of them went on the stand and testified live in the court proceeding. And further proof that these people were crooks, when Liberace died, he left a nice chunk of money to his housekeepers. He had, 3 or 4. And the maid in Las Vegas, Gladys, he gave her a house, gave her a car, he gave her cash, big cash. And I mean, that's a lot to give a maid. Did similar things to other employees. But this maid that we didn't think he knew was screwing his boyfriend, he didn't leave her anything. The other employees, sure, he was very, very generous. But oddly enough, this one maid got cut out. Why? Why did Liberace cut her out? He never said a bad word about her. I think he finally figured it out and realized people were not lying to him. George Liniers, who he fired for telling him the truth, was not lying. If you're living in a house, I don't care how big the house is, and your spouse is having a sexual affair with one of the household employees, Harvey, you're going to notice something. You're going to notice a little look between them now and then. You're going to notice a little touch, a little nod or a wink every now and then. And you just kind of file it away, for future consideration. He couldn't have been blind to all of that.
What was the result of the lawsuit?
Seymour lost. And the judge ruled in favor of Liberace's attorney and upheld the will. He did the right thing. They put Seymour Heller on the stand, and in cross-examination, attorney for the attorney said, isn't it the whole reason you're here with this lawsuit just about money? And didn't you make X number of millions of dollars as his manager every year, and now you make zero? Isn't that the truth, Mr. Heller? Mr. Heller broke down in tears on the stand. It was reported in the Las Vegas newspapers that day that he broke down on the stand and said, the money's gone. The income, I used to make so much money representing Liberace. Nothing now. What will I do? It's money. That's what it was about for Seymour. So, of course, the judge, ruled as he did.
So here we are, Steve, almost 40 years since Liberace died. From what you know, are there people out there today who are taking advantage of Liberace's personal brand by using his name and image without proper licensing from the estate?
Oh, yeah. Not many, but there's 2 or 3 out there that are, and it's unfortunate. It's against the law. You can't take a trademark brand like Coca-Cola or McDonald's hamburgers and use their name on your own business and imply that, you're endorsed by them. You can't do that without getting their permission, without a licensing deal where you're paying those people for the licensing of their established brand name. But here we have some individuals that are doing just that with Liberace, and it's unfortunate. These same people have reached out to me, maybe 10 years ago, reached out to me to kind of get my participation, to get my endorsement. And I listened to them for a while, and I finally said, what you're doing is not right. You need to pay for the use of Liberace's name. And they kind of turned on me too. It's terrible when there's money involved. People can get real nasty, and there's a business. I won't say which one, but there's a business in Las Vegas where they're using Liberace's name, and there's tours of it on YouTube and such that, and half of what they're saying is not true, and not everything is legitimate or actual Liberace stuff. It's dishonest, and they get away with it. It's terrible, terrible.
That's very disturbing. Steve, you played a very important role in a documentary about Liberace called Look Me Over, which came out in 2021, won several prestigious film festival awards. What did you think of that movie?
I think it came out real nice. It won the New York Film Critics Award. It's pretty good. It's entertaining. It's funny.
Where can people see the movie?
Right now, it's on YouTube in Germany. It was aired. It was produced by Arte, which is a television network in Europe, and it aired all over Europe for about a year. It was in the theaters for a while. Then it aired on television on Arte. After that airing, it now lives on YouTube in Germany. And that's not the same YouTube that we see here in North America. It's the YouTube version in Germany. So you need to be in Germany to watch it.
Well, I hope at some point that documentary will be available for North American and British and Australian viewers as well, because Liberace had a lot of fans here.
Yes, I hope so too. I've spoken with the producers and the director of the film about bringing it here to the United States. There is interest in bringing it here, but the producers in Germany don't really trust the American businessmen. They don't trust the Americans who say they're going to publish it here in the United States. And so they shy away from it. That's what they have told me directly to me.
Well, that's unfortunate. They need to get some good legal counsel. Now, Steve, Liberace had a reputation for being a dog lover. He rescued many dogs throughout his life. He had 26 dogs when he died. What happened to those dogs after he died?
Oh boy, all of them were adopted real fast by friends of Liberace's. All of his dogs were at various houses of his, and the household employees took care of them. They lived great lives, They had outstanding veterinary care, checkups every 3 months, and they ate filet mignon and fresh vegetables prepared for them. They all lived to be really old and beautiful.
Well, one of those beautiful dogs has a great grandson named PJ, who happens to be in the custody of one Steve Garey. Do you think that you could bring PJ to the screen so we could see him?
Sure. What happened was in 1986, summer of 1986, a well-meaning friend of Lee's wanted to give him a puppy to cheer him up. And they did. They gave him a little white miniature poodle, off-white poodle. And it did cheer Lee up. And he named the dog Precious Jewel and called Precious Jewel PJ for short. And when Lee died and all of his dogs were adopted by people, the original family that gifted Liberace with the dog took the dog back and bred the dog and had many generations of puppies over the years. So fast forward to 2010, I get an email. I stayed in touch with him, and we had mutual friends as well. That PJ lived to be 23 years and 11 months old. When he passed, it was just a month shy of PJ's 24th birthday. And right to the end, he had his eyesight and his hearing, and he was a happy, happy dog. So it was a happy ending for little PJ. A few months after that, it was maybe 2 years later, in 2012, my husband and I were looking for a dog that would be non-allergic, a poodle. And I reached out to different shelters and I contacted this guy because I know that they bred poodles. And he says, well, Steve, you remember PJ? And I said, yes. And he says, well, we have PJ's great, 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 great grandson, who we adopted out to a woman, and less than a year later, she died. And so we took this dog back, and we have it now, and it's available if you'd like to meet the dog and maybe consider adopting PJ's great grandson. Well, I hurried over as fast as could be and fell in love immediately with this little puppy. We adopted the dog immediately, and of course, I named him PJ.
Hello, PJ. Oh my Lord, he's the sweetest little dog.
Named after his famous grandfather, PJ Liberace, and he looks just like him. And he's 12 years old, or no, he's 13 years old now. He's in perfect health. He's the smartest dog I've ever had. And, my husband passed away very suddenly from an aggressive stomach cancer. And I'm awfully glad to have our dogs because they've given me great comfort. We have two dogs in my grief and missing my husband. So they're a great benefit to me. PJ and his brother Charlie and I, we go to the dog park almost every day. We go on trips together, and they have a good life, and so thusly I have a good life too.
Well, that is lovely. Thank you for sharing PJ with us. He's beautiful. Steve, how do you think Liberace would want to be remembered? Did he ever talk to you about that?
Well, yeah, he did. I don't know the answer to that, but he did. He would often talk about, when I'm gone, and long after I'm a memory, and long after I'm dead. He would talk about his will and his legacy with anybody that would listen around the house. He did. I can tell you this. I don't think he realized that he would still be remembered this many years later. He never really realized he was as big a star as he was. I know what was important to him, and that's something that I have respected throughout my entire career up to when I retired, and that is his legacy of his charitable work with the Liberace Foundation for the Performing and Creative Arts in Las Vegas. That is what he said he wanted to be remembered as. That's what he considered his best work. He left all of his millions to that charity. They provided educational opportunities for talented young students that couldn't otherwise afford it. And God bless him. I've met many of the students that benefited and got an education, these Liberace scholars, we call them. And it's so touching to see the education they got because of him. One drummer I hired for my show, and he nearly had tears in his eyes playing my show. He called his mother on his cell phone in the middle of the show and told her, "Look, Ma, look what I'm doing. I'm playing I got the university degree because of Liberace, and now I'm playing for his protege. Look, Mom." He nearly had tears. I nearly had tears during the show. It was marvelous to see. Well, that's what was important to Liberace. And now today, the Liberace Foundation has changed, as the world has changed, but they're still preserving Liberace's legacy, and they're still moving and changing with the times. They have a magnificent chairman at the helm now. His name is Jonathan Warren, and is a smart man, and he has assembled a stellar team of board of directors, and together they're doing great things. And to show you the integrity of these people, they reached out to Liberace's personal attorney, Joel Stroat, who I've mentioned in this afternoon with you here, Harvey. They found him in LA. He's doing well. We're all getting older, but they found him, and they reached out to him to bring him on board and participate with them, and to bring Liberace's vision of charitable work into the next generation and the next generation. I can't say enough good things.
And what a wonderful legacy for Liberace to have that foundation. Well, my dear Steve, I'm so very grateful to you for once again taking the time to come on our show and share your memories and insights about the one and only Liberace. Thank you so, so much for coming back to our show, Steve.
Thank you, Harvey. It's just a delight. It's good to see you. And thank you. My thanks again to every one of your wonderful viewers. They're so nice to me. And I really appreciate all the lovely comments and the lovely emails. I wanted to give my thank yous.
Well, you're about to get a whole lot more, I think. Our guest has been Liberace's protege and world-renowned pianist, recording artist, and entertainer, Steve Garey. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you so much for joining us. See you next time. Thank you to my producer, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli at the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my PR directors, Eileen Shapiro and Jimmy Starr, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.